Blood trickled down Special Agent Elijah Brooks' temple as he stood over the fallen police chief badge and one-hand gun in the other. Behind him, 8-year-old Zuri watched with innocent eyes. 3 officers lay handcuffed on the station floor. The reckoning had only just begun. Before we dive into this powerful story of justice, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of storytellers. How far would you go to protect your child from a system built to destroy them? Let's find out as we journey through one father's quest for justice. In the heart of Mapleton, Georgia, a mid-sized city with deep racial divisions running like fault lines through its seemingly peaceful streets, lived 8-year-old Zuri Brooks, a bright, vibrant black girl who had been born deaf, but whose spirit spoke volumes. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of her bedroom, illuminating the space decorated with colorful drawings, sign language charts, and photos of her with her parents. Zuri sat cross-legged on her bed, practicing the new signs she had learned yesterday with determined precision. Her small fingers moved with grace beyond her years, forming words and phrases that most people in her world couldn't understand. Across town, her father, Elijah Brooks, sat at his desk at the regional FBI field office reviewing case files of civil rights violations that had become his specialization over his 15-year career with the Bureau. At 41 Special Agent, Brooks carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen the worst of humanity but still believed in justice. His office walls displayed both his commendations and photos of Zuri, at various ages, her wide smile, a reminder of why he fought so hard against the injustices that plagued communities like theirs. The phone on his desk rang, and he answered to hear his wife Layla's voice. "Just checking to make sure you're still okay with Zuri going to the festival alone." "Today," she said, her voice carrying the natural concern of a mother whose child faced additional challenges in a world that often failed to accommodate them. "She's been practicing what to do all week." Elijah tapped his pen against the stack of reports documenting excessive force against minority citizens. "She needs this independence," he replied, his voice firm, but tinged with the worry he tried to conceal. "We've prepared her as best we can." Later that afternoon, Layla helped Zuri pack her small backpack with her ASL communication cards, identification, and emergency contact information. At 38, Layla Brooks had become a respected community activist, fighting for both racial equality and disability rights, inspired by the challenges her daughter faced daily. "Remember what Dad taught you," Layla signed to Zuri, her hands moving in the language that had become the family's bridge across silence. "If anyone makes you uncomfortable," Zuri's hands flew in response, signing back confidently. "Walk away, find a safe adult, use my cards." Her dark eyes sparkled with excitement about her first solo outing. The previous week at Lincoln Elementary School, Zuri had experienced the dual prejudice that shaped much of her young life. Mrs. Patterson, her third-grade teacher, had grown impatient with having to accommodate Zuri's needs in class, and had placed her desk in the back corner, away from the visual aids she needed to follow lessons. When Layla confronted the teacher, Mrs. Patterson's response had been telling. "She's already behind the other students. Maybe you should consider a special school." The unstated implication that Zuri's challenges were somehow compounded by her race hung in the air, unacknowledged, but unmistakable. Elijah had taught Zuri from an early age about the reality of being black in America, adapting the difficult conversations to her understanding. He balanced these lessons with affirmations of her worth and intelligence, determined that she would not internalize the limitations others tried to impose on her. In their backyard, under the shade of an old oak tree, he had created a space where Zuri could practice navigating challenging situations through role-play. "The world won't always understand you," he signed to her during one of these sessions, "but never let anyone make you feel small." Zuri nodded solemnly, absorbing her father's wisdom with the seriousness of a child who already understood more about injustice than most adults would acknowledge. As the afternoon of the festival approached, Zuri stood before the mirror, adjusting her favorite yellow headband against her dark curls. Her reflection showed a girl on the cusp of discovering her independence, unaware that the boundaries of her resilience would soon be tested in ways her parents had feared, but could never fully prepare her for. Elijah kneeled before her at the front door, checking her backpack one last time. "You remember our special sign?" he asked, his hands creating the unique gesture they had developed years ago, a combination of love and strength. Zuri mirrored the sign back to him, her face alight with pride and anticipation. As she walked down the driveway toward the community center where the festival was being held, Elijah watched from the porch, a complex mixture of pride and apprehension settling in his chest. He couldn't protect her from everything, he knew that. But he had tried to give her the tools to navigate a world that too often judged her for both her silence and her skin. The Mapleton Spring Festival beckoned just 8 blocks away with its colorful banners and promise of independence, while at home, her parents exchanged a glance that contained all their unspoken fears for their daughter stepping alone into a world not designed for her. The Mapleton Spring Festival buzzed with energy as Zuri made her way through the crowded streets lined with vendors selling everything from handcrafted jewelry to fried peach pies. Clutching her ASL communication cards in one hand, she moved with cautious excitement, her eyes drinking in the vibrant scenes around her. The sense of independence filled her with pride. For the first time, she navigated the world on her own terms, using the strategies her parents had carefully taught her. Near the central pavilion, a group of teenagers huddled together, their laughter visible in their expressions even if Zuri couldn't hear it. She accidentally bumped into one of them, a tall boy wearing a red baseball cap. When she pulled out her communication card to apologize, the teens' faces transformed from surprise to mockery. The tallest boy snatched her card, holding it high above her reach, while his friends doubled over in exaggerated silent pantomimes, cruelly imitating what they imagined deaf communication to be. Tears welled in Zuri's eyes as she jumped to retrieve her card, her hands signing please, and give back in desperate motions that only intensified their ridicule. A few yards away, Officers Thomas Reed and Michael Delaney noticed the commotion. Officer Reed, a 34-year-old with 14 years on the force and 7 excessive force complaints in his file, nudged his younger partner. "Trouble at 2 o'clock, he said already, moving toward the group with his hand resting casually on his holster. Officer Delaney, 29, and eager to impress his senior partner, followed closely behind. As they approached, the teenagers scattered, leaving Zuri alone, still reaching for her communication card that had fallen to the ground. Officer Reed's heavy boot came down just inches from the card as he towered over the small girl. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice sharp with authority that Zuri couldn't hear. When she didn't respond verbally, instead reaching for her card with trembling fingers, Reed's expression hardened. "I asked you a question," he barked, interpreting her silence as defiance rather than disability. Zuri's hands moved frantically, trying to explain through sign language that she couldn't hear him, that she needed her communication cards. Officer Delaney watched with growing unease as his partner became visibly agitated by what he perceived as disrespect. "Hey, I think she might be deaf," Delaney suggested, noticing the distinctive movements of her hands. Reed scoffed. "Or she's pretending. Seen it before. These kids think acting disabled gets them special treatment." Beverly Williams, the owner of a nearby gift shop, approached the officers with swift, determined steps. At 55, she had lived in Mapleton her entire life and had called the police on black youths for perceived infractions at least a dozen times in the past year alone. "Officers, I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice carrying the artificial concern of someone who had already decided on a narrative. "That girl was bothering customers, and I think she was trying to steal from my shop earlier." The accusation was entirely fabricated, but it gave Reed the justification he sought. He grabbed Zuri's arm, roughly spinning her to face him. The sudden movement terrified the girl, who had no context for why this man in uniform was handling her so aggressively. Her hands flew faster, more desperately trying to communicate. "She's getting agitated," Reed warned, deliberately misinterpreting her signed pleas as threatening gestures. Might be on something. Officer Delaney shifted uncomfortably but didn't contradict his partner. Instead, he asked, "Should we call for someone who knows sign language?" Reed's response came with a dismissive wave. "We don't have time for that. She needs to comply like everyone else." By now, several festival attendees had stopped to watch the confrontation, some with phones raised to record the increasingly tense scene. A middle-aged black woman stepped forward, saying, "She's just a child and she's deaf. Can't you see she's trying to communicate with you?" Reed turned to the woman with a cold stare. "Ma'am, step back, or you'll be interfering with police business." Zuri's fear escalated to panic as Officer Reed attempted to handcuff her small wrists. Her body tensed instinctively, a natural response to being restrained that Reed immediately classified as resisting arrest. With unnecessary force, he threw Zuri to the ground, her small body hitting the pavement with a thud that she couldn't hear but felt through every bone. A collective gasp rose from the gathering crowd. Tears streamed down Zuri's face as she tried to reach into her pocket, desperate to find her identification card that explained her condition. "Gun." Officer Delaney shouted, reflexively misreading the sudden movement. In an instant that would forever alter multiple lives, Officer Reed drew his weapon and fired. The sound echoed through the festival grounds, sending people scrambling for cover. Zuri felt a searing pain tear through her shoulder, her world spinning into a blur of faces and sky. Blood spread across her yellow sundress as she lay motionless on the pavement, her hands finally still. The crowd erupted in screams and shouts of outrage. Officer Reed stood over the small, bleeding form, his service weapon still drawn, while Officer Delaney stared in horror at what had just transpired. Phones captured it all: the unjustified escalation, the excessive force, the shooting of an unarmed 8-year-old deaf black girl, whose only crime had been her inability to hear the commands shouted at her. As Zuri's consciousness faded, her last thought was of the special sign she shared with her father, her fingers weakly forming the gesture for love and strength before her hand fell limply to her side. Special Agent Elijah Brooks was reviewing witness statements for a hate crime case when his cell phone vibrated against his desk. The number wasn't saved in his contacts, but the Mapleton area code made him answer immediately, a father's intuition already sending alarm signals through his body. "Mr. Brooks." The voice belonged to a stranger, breathless and distressed. "Your daughter's been shot by police at the Spring Festival. They're taking her to Mercy Hospital right now." The words hit Elijah like physical blows, each one stealing his breath. Shot by police. His voice dropped to a whisper as colleagues turned to look at him. "Is she alive?" The question hung in the air for a millisecond that stretched like eternity. "Yes, but it's bad. You need to get here now." The line went dead. Elijah moved on autopilot, grabbing his jacket and Keys' FBI badge heavy in his pocket. He didn't tell his supervisor the details, only that there was a family emergency. He wouldn't activate his professional identity yet. That card would be played when it could do the most damage. The drive to Mercy Hospital normally took 20 minutes from the federal building. Elijah made it in 8, every traffic law broken with the precision of a man trained in tactical driving. His knuckles whitened against the steering wheel as his mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. Memories assaulted him in flashes, teaching Zuri how to approach police officers, how to make her disability immediately known, practicing over and over until the movements were second nature. Had she forgotten in a moment of panic? Or had they simply not cared? By the time he screeched into the emergency room parking lot, Elijah's shock had crystallized into something harder, colder, more dangerous. The hospital corridors blurred as he ran toward the trauma unit, following the nurse who recognized the desperation in his eyes. He found Layla in the waiting area, her face buried in her hands' shoulders, shaking with silent sobs. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice a stranger's. Layla looked up, her face transformed by grief and rage. "Surgery," she managed between breaths. "Shoulder wound. The bullet. It fragmented. They're trying to remove the pieces near her spine." The clinical description of his daughter's injury made Elijah's vision darken at the edges. Before he could respond, a man in a police uniform approached them, his posture rigid with official purpose rather than compassion. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, I'm Police Chief Robert Garrison." The man extended a hand that neither parent took. At 52, Garrison had the weathered face of someone who had spent decades cultivating power in a small city, his silver hair and confident stance designed to command respect. Elijah noted everything about him, with the practiced eye of an FBI agent building a profile, the too straight posture, the rehearsed sympathy that didn't reach his eyes, the way his right hand kept checking that his body camera was turned off. "I want to personally express how deeply unfortunate this incident was." Garrison continued, his words clearly chosen to avoid any admission of wrongdoing. "The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation." "Unfortunate incident," Layla's voice rose dangerously. "Your officers shot my 8-year-old daughter who can't hear. What possible justification could they have?" Garrison's expression hardened slightly. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but the situation was complex. Our officers were responding to reports of a disturbance, and there was a misunderstanding when your daughter didn't comply with verbal commands." Elijah stepped forward deliberately, using his height to tower over the police chief. "A misunderstanding. She's deaf. That's why she didn't comply with verbal commands she couldn't hear." He didn't introduce himself as FBI, yet presenting only as a father burning with righteous fury. "I want the names of the officers involved. and I want to see the body cam footage. Now, Chief Garrison took a small step back. The officers are Thomas Reed and Michael Delaney. As for the footage, unfortunately there seems to have been a technical malfunction with both cameras during the incident. We're looking into it. The convenient failure of both body cams sent a red flag up in Elijah's mind. He filed the information away, adding it to the case he was already building. A malfunction. How convenient, he said, voice deadly quiet. The double doors to the surgical unit swung open, and a doctor in blood-spattered scrubs approached them. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, I'm Dr. Rivera, the trauma surgeon working on your daughter. His face carried the weary compassion of someone who had delivered too many difficult updates. Zuri is stable. We've removed most of the bullet fragments, but there are small pieces too close to her spinal cord to safely extract. She's lost a significant amount of blood, and there's muscle and nerve damage to her right shoulder that will require extensive physical therapy. Layla swayed slightly, and Elijah wrapped an arm around her waist to steady her. Will she? Will there be permanent damage? Dr. Rivera's hesitation answered before his words did. It's too early to say with certainty. The physical wounds will heal with time and therapy, but the psychological trauma. He trailed off, then added, She's young, which works in her favor for recovery. As the doctor continued explaining Zuri's condition and treatment plan, Elijah noticed a black female police officer hovering at the edge of the waiting room, her expression troubled as she observed Chief Garrison. When their eyes met briefly, she quickly looked away, but not before Elijah registered the conflict in her face. The identification badge on her uniform read Sergeant A. Washington, another potential piece of his puzzle. By late afternoon, the hospital had become the epicenter of a rapidly expanding crisis. News of Zuri's shooting had spread through social media and local news channels, bringing dozens of community members to gather outside, many holding hastily made signs demanding justice. Inside, Elijah sat beside Zuri's bed in the pediatric ICU, watching the slow rise and fall of her small chest, the white bandages stark against her dark skin. Tubes and wires connected her to machines that beeped and hummed in a rhythm that seemed to mock the silence she lived in. Layla had stepped out to speak with family members who had arrived to offer support, leaving Elijah alone with his unconscious daughter and his darkening thoughts. His phone vibrated with a news alert. Opening it, he found cell phone footage from the festival already circulating online. With trembling fingers, he pressed play and watched as officers Reed and Delaney confronted his daughter. He saw her attempts to communicate, saw Reed throw her to the ground, saw the moment when panic and prejudice led to a gunshot that tore through his child's small body. The phone nearly cracked in his grip. What would you do if you watched your child being brutalized by those sworn to protect and serve? Would you trust the system to deliver justice? Or would you become justice itself? If you believe the officers should be immediately arrested, comment number 1. If you think Elijah should use his FBI position right away, comment number 2. Hit like and subscribe to follow this story of a father's fight against corrupt power. Can one man dismantle an entire system of injustice, or will the blue wall of silence prove impenetrable? Let's continue and find out what happens when a father's love collides with institutional racism. The rhythmic beeping of medical monitors provided a constant backdrop to the sterile hospital room where Zuri lay recovering from surgery. Elijah hadn't left her side for 36 hours. His body hunched in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, one hand always touching his daughter's, as if the physical connection could somehow protect her from further harm. Layla entered with 2 cups of coffee, the dark circles under her eyes matching his own. The doctor says she's stabilizing, she whispered, placing 1 cup on the side table, but they're concerned about potential infection at the wound site. Elijah nodded silently, his gaze fixed on Zuri's face, peaceful in medicated sleep, but occasionally twitching with pain. The muted television mounted on the wall played a press conference where Chief Garrison stood before a forest of microphones, his expression solemn but unapologetic. Our officers responded to reports of a disturbance at the Spring Festival, he stated with practiced confidence. When confronted, the subject became agitated and made sudden movements that officers reasonably interpreted as reaching for a weapon. Officer Reed, a decorated member of our force, took necessary action to protect himself and the public from what he perceived as an imminent threat. The blatant mischaracterization of events made Elijah's blood boil. Even more infuriating was the media's frequent use of phrases like officer-involved shooting instead of police shoot deaf child, the passive language obscuring accountability. Outside the hospital, the gathering of concerned citizens had grown into a full-scale protest. Signs reading "Justice for Zuri" and "Deaf Lives Matter" bobbed above the crowd as speakers with megaphones led chants demanding accountability. The hospital administration had increased security, claiming concern about potential unrest, but effectively creating another barrier between Zuri and her community supporters. When Elijah stepped away to use the restroom, he made a critical call from a stairwell where he couldn't be overheard. "Marcus, it's Elijah," he said quietly into his phone. "I need to activate an unofficial investigation." Director Marcus Hayden, Elijah's supervisor at the FBI, listened gravely as his agent explained the situation in clipped professional terms that barely contained his personal anguish. "This sounds like a clear civil rights violation," Elijah Hayden replied after a long pause. "But you know I can't authorize an official investigation without Justice Department approval, which takes time." "I don't have time," Elijah countered, his voice tight. "Every minute that passes, they're constructing their narrative, destroying evidence, coaching witnesses." Hayden sighed heavily. "Off the books, then. No bureau resources, no official capacity. You're on leave for a family emergency as far as anyone knows. Whatever you find, bring it to me when it's solid enough that I can take it upstairs." Elijah thanked him and hung up already, mentally assembling his plan of attack. Back in Zuri's room, a nurse was checking her vitals when Elijah returned. "There's a reporter in the lobby asking to speak with you," she mentioned casually. Hospital security told her to leave, but she left her card. She handed him a business card for Kendra Watson, investigative reporter for the Mapleton Chronicle, with a handwritten note on the back. "I don't believe the official story. Call me." Elijah pocketed the card, adding another potential ally to his mental list. The afternoon brought a parade of officers from the Mapleton Police Department, ostensibly visiting to express concern for Zuri's condition. Elijah recognized the true purpose behind their presence: gathering intelligence, assessing the family's intentions, perhaps even intimidating potential complainants. Most departed quickly after encountering Elijah's icy stare, but Sergeant Alicia Washington lingered after her colleagues left. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly, checking to ensure they weren't overheard. "I want you to know that not everyone in the department supports what happened. Some of us are." She hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't amount to career suicide, troubled by the inconsistencies in the official report. Elijah studied her carefully. Inconsistencies like mysteriously malfunctioning body cams. Washington's eyes widened slightly. Among other things, she confirmed cautiously, "Officer Reed has a history of escalating situations, especially with minority citizens. Those complaints never seem to go anywhere." She glanced at Zuri's sleeping form, genuine compassion crossing her features. This shouldn't have happened. Not to any child. She left quickly afterward, but the brief exchange confirmed what Elijah already suspected: the corruption wasn't total. There were potential cracks in the blue wall that he could exploit. Later that evening, as storm clouds gathered literally and figuratively over Mapleton, the local news reported that the police union had issued a statement fully supporting Officers Reed and Delaney, describing them as heroes who made split-second decisions in a threatening situation. The statement was accompanied by an interview with Beverly Williams, the shop owner who had first accused Zuri of causing trouble. "I saw that girl acting erratically," Williams told the reporter, with rehearsed certainty. "She was aggressive toward other festival goers and wouldn't listen when people told her to stop. Those officers were just doing their jobs." The blatant lies made Layla throw her coffee cup against the wall, the dark liquid staining the hospital room like spilled blood. "They're painting our baby." As the criminal, she sobbed, anger and grief tangling in her voice. "They shot her, and now they're trying to justify it with lies." Elijah pulled his wife close, his mind still strategizing, even as he comforted her. "They don't know who they're dealing with," he promised quietly. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." As night fell, Pastor James Wilson of First Baptist Church arrived to offer support to the family. At 63, the civil rights veteran had seen this pattern play out too many times in communities across America. "The first 48 hours after an incident like this are critical," he told Elijah, as they spoke in hushed tones in the hallway. "They're counting on the initial outrage to fade for people to accept their version of events and move on. Don't let them run out the clock." Elijah nodded grimly. "I'm familiar with the playbook, Pastor. I've investigated enough civil rights cases to know how this works. But they don't realize I have resources they can't anticipate." Pastor Wilson squeezed his shoulder. "Whatever you need from the community, just say the word. We've organized a prayer vigil tonight, but we're ready for more direct action if necessary. When he returned to Zuri's room, Elijah found his daughter awake, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. He rushed to her side, his hands immediately forming the signs for Dad here, and safe now. But Zuri didn't respond with her usual animated signing. Instead, she stared blankly at his moving hands, then turned her face away, her body trembling. The trauma surgeon had warned them about possible PTSD, explaining that traumatic events could sometimes trigger selective mutism, even in communication methods that didn't require speech. Seeing his vibrant, expressive daughter withdraw into herself broke something in Elijah that no amount of professional training could repair. As Zuri drifted back to sleep, sedated by pain medication, Layla wiped tears from her eyes and straightened her shoulders with new resolve. I'm going to join the protest tomorrow. She decided, her voice steadier than it had been all day. Our community needs to see us fighting back, not just grieving. Zuri needs to know we're fighting for her. Elijah didn't try to dissuade her. They would fight on different fronts, Layla rallying public support and community pressure, while he worked in the shadows to dismantle the system that had nearly taken their daughter's life. As lightning flashed outside the hospital windows, illuminating the growing crowd of protesters who had stayed despite the approaching storm, Elijah made a silent vow to his sleeping daughter. The officers who had harmed her, and the system that protected them, would face a reckoning they could never have anticipated. The gathering storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing within him, a perfect fusion of a father's rage and a federal agent's methodical determination to expose corruption and deliver justice, no matter the personal cost. The fluorescent lights of the Mapleton Police Department headquarters buzzed overhead as Elijah Brooks strode through the main entrance, his FBI credentials displayed prominently on his suit jacket. The desk sergeant's eyes widened at the federal identification, clearly unprepared for a bureau presence in their small department. Special Agent Brooks Elijah introduced himself, deliberately using his professional identity for the first time since Zuri's shooting. I need access to your records department and evidence room. The sergeant fumbled for the phone. I'll need to notify Chief Garrison that you're here, sir. Elijah leaned forward slightly, his voice pleasant, but carrying an unmistakable edge. That won't be necessary. I'm here conducting a preliminary review as part of a potential federal civil rights investigation. Chief Garrison will be interviewed at a later stage. The careful wording implying but not outright stating official bureau involvement had the desired effect. Within minutes, Elijah was escorted to the records department, where decades of police reports, complaints, and internal investigations were stored in both digital and paper formats. His first target was the personnel files of Officers Reed and Delaney. What he found confirmed his suspicions and fueled his determination. Officer Thomas Reed's file contained 7 excessive force complaints over his 14-year career, all involving minority citizens, all dismissed after cursory internal investigations. More tellingly, Reed had transferred to Mapleton PD after resigning from the Atlanta Police Department following an excessive force incident that had been on the verge of resulting in disciplinary action. Officer Michael Delaney's record was cleaner, showing only 2 years with the department and no formal complaints, though his performance reviews noted his strong partnership with Reed and willingness to learn from experienced officers. Between the lines, Elijah read the story of a young officer being molded in the image of a problem cop absorbing the department's toxic culture. Digging deeper into departmental records, a pattern emerged of Chief Garrison's systematic protection of officers accused of misconduct, particularly when those accusations came from black residents. Complaints were routinely classified as unfounded without proper investigation. Witnesses were intimidated or their statements discredited, and officers with multiple infractions received promotions rather than discipline. In one particularly disturbing case from 3 years earlier, a black teenager with autism had been pepper sprayed and beaten during a wellness check after neighbors reported his unusual behavior. The boy's family had filed a complaint and threatened a lawsuit, but mysteriously withdrew both after a private meeting with Chief Garrison. The settlement terms were sealed, and the officers involved received commendations for resolving a volatile situation. As Elijah was photographing documents with his phone, a soft knock on the records room door interrupted his work. Sergeant Alicia Washington entered, closing the door quickly behind her. I thought I might find you here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're not just Zuri's father, are you? Elijah evaluated her for a moment before responding. FBI Civil Rights Division, he confirmed. though I'm operating unofficially at the moment. Washington nodded, unsurprised. I suspected something like that from how you handled Garrison. Listen, I don't have much time before someone notices I'm in here, but there's something you should know. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket. Reed and Delaney's text messages from the last 6 months. I'm part of the internal tech support team, and I made a copy before they could be accidentally deleted during the investigation. Elijah accepted the drive, careful not to ask how she had obtained what was almost certainly inadmissible evidence in its current form. Why are you helping me? Washington's expression hardened. I joined the force to protect and serve my community, not to watch it be terrorized by badges and guns. Reed has been a problem for years, but nobody would listen to my concerns because I'm a black woman in a department where both those things count against me. She glanced at her watch. I need to get back to my post. But if you go to Lester's diner tonight around 11, you might find someone else willing to talk. Booth in the back order the meatloaf special. She slipped out as quietly as she had entered, leaving Elijah with both new evidence and a promising lead. Later that evening, in a motel room he'd checked into under a false name, Elijah examined the contents of the flash drive. The text messages between Reed and Delaney revealed a horrifying glimpse into their mindset. Reed repeatedly used racial slurs when discussing black suspects, referred to the predominantly black east side of Mapleton as the zoo, and specifically mocked Zuri in messages after the shooting. Not so mouthy now that she's got a bullet in her. Maybe she can hear this, lol. Delaney's responses were less overtly racist, but showed his complicity, frequently responding with laughing emojis, or got to keep them in line. The text provided clear evidence of the racial animus behind Reed's actions, crucial for establishing a civil rights violation. Elijah's research also uncovered a suspicious connection between Beverly Williams, the shop owner who had falsely accused Zuri, and the police department. Williams' brother, it turned out, was Captain James Williams, head of internal affairs, and a close ally of Chief Garrison. The family connection explained her willingness to provide false statements supporting the officer's version of events. At precisely 11 that night, Elijah sat in the back booth of Lester's diner, a greasy spoon on the outskirts of town that catered to night shift workers and long-haul truckers. He ordered the meatloaf special as instructed and waited his back to the wall, constantly scanning for potential threats or surveillance. 20 minutes later, a nervous-looking man in his 50s sat down across from him without introduction. I'm Captain Derek Sullivan, Internal Affairs, he said quietly, fidgeting with a paper napkin. Washington said you're FBI. Elijah neither confirmed nor denied, letting Sullivan continue. I've been with IA for 17 years, and I've watched Garrison turn this department into his personal fiefdom. Any officer who questions him gets transferred to the worst beats, or driven out entirely. Sullivan leaned forward. I've tried to investigate Reed 3 times for excessive force. Each time Garrison shut it down before I could even interview witnesses. Why tell me this now? Elijah asked, studying the man's body language for signs of deception. Sullivan's laugh was bitter. Because they shot a deaf kid, for Christ's sake, and they're still circling the wagons. There's a line and they crossed it. But you need to be careful. Garrison has friends in the mayor's office, the DA's office, even a couple of judges. This town runs on his say-so. Before Elijah could press for more specific information, Sullivan tensed suddenly. Don't turn around. Reed just walked in with 2 other officers. I need to go before they see us together. He stood casually, as if they'd never spoken, and made his way to the cash register to pay for a coffee he hadn't ordered. Elijah remained in the booth, finishing his meal with deliberate slowness, aware of Reed's presence at the counter behind him. Though they had never formally met, the possibility that Reed might recognize him from the hospital or news coverage of the protests made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He paid his bill and left without incident, but the close call reinforced the need for caution. Driving back to his motel, Elijah noticed a patrol car following at a discreet distance. When he took a series of random turns and the car remained behind him, his suspicions were confirmed. The surveillance suggested that someone in the department had connected him to more than just being Zuri's father. His phone rang as he was contemplating how to lose his tail. Elijah, it's Sergeant Washington. Don't react to what I'm about to tell you. I just found out that the body cam footage from Reed and Delaney wasn't actually corrupted. It exists, but Garrison ordered the tech department to classify it as unrecoverable. I don't have access to the secure server where it's stored, but I know it's there. This information changed everything. Body cam footage would provide irrefutable evidence of what had actually occurred, potentially showing Reed's racial animus in action and disproving the claim that Zuri had made threatening movements. How heavily is the server protected, he asked, already formulating a plan. Military-grade encryption accessible only from terminals inside the station and only by users with alpha-level clearance. Basically, Garrison Captain Williams and the head of IT. Washington paused. But there might be another way. The system automatically backs up to cloud storage every 72 hours. The next backup is scheduled for tomorrow night at 3 a.m. During the backup, the security protocols are momentarily relaxed to allow the data transfer. It was a narrow window of opportunity, but potentially their best chance at accessing the unaltered footage. Elijah thanked her and ended the call, making a mental note to recommend Washington for a position with the Bureau when this was all over. Her integrity and courage were exactly what law enforcement needed. Back at the motel, Elijah was compiling his growing evidence file when his phone rang again. This time the number was blocked. When he answered, the voice on the other end was disguised by some kind of electronic filter. Agent Brooks, this is your only warning. Stop digging, or what happened to your daughter will look like a playground accident compared to what happens next. We know where your wife is staying. We know which hospital room your kid is in. Back off. The call ended before he could respond. Elijah sat motionless for several seconds, ice flowing through his veins. The threat confirmed he was making progress, hitting nerves within the corrupt department. It also raised the stakes dramatically. He immediately called Layla, instructing her to take Zuri's parents to the hospital and not to leave their daughter's side under any circumstances. Then he contacted Director Hayden, briefing him on the developments and the threat. I need protection for my family, he concluded, but I need to stay under the radar to finish building this case. Hayden's response was immediate and reassuring. I'll have 2 agents there within the hour, posing as hospital security consultants. They'll keep your family safe while you finish what you've started. But Elijah, be careful. These kinds of corrupt departments are like wounded animals when cornered. And get me something solid soon, so I can bring in the cavalry. As midnight approached, Elijah methodically cleaned his service weapon, the routine maintenance, a counterpoint to the storm of emotions within him. The threat against his family had crystallized his purpose, transforming his professional determination into something more primal. The corrupt officers of Mapleton PD had no idea what they had unleashed by targeting his child. They would soon learn that they had not only shot the daughter of an FBI agent, but awakened a father's most dangerous instinct, the absolute unwavering commitment to protect his family at any cost. Rain pelted the hospital windows as Zuri Brooks sat motionless in her bed, staring at the animated show playing silently on the television. It had been 5 days since the shooting, and while her physical wounds were beginning to heal, her spirit remained fractured. Layla gently brushed her daughter's hair, careful to avoid the bandaged shoulder, while Elijah stood by the window, watching the police cruiser that had been parked across the street for the past 48 hours. The surveillance was becoming more overt, a clear attempt at intimidation. She still won't sign, Layla whispered, her voice breaking as she set down the hairbrush. Not a word since she woke up. Elijah moved to the bedside, kneeling to meet his daughter's gaze. His hands formed the familiar patterns of their private language, asking if she was in pain, if she needed anything. Zuri's eyes tracked his movements, but her own hands remained still on the hospital blanket, the trauma having silenced even her silent voice. The psychologist had explained that Zuri was experiencing a form of selective mutism triggered by extreme trauma, her brain protecting itself by shutting down her primary means of communication. Dr. Maya Chen, a specialist in trauma therapy for deaf children, had been brought in from Atlanta at Elijah's insistence. Recovery isn't linear, she had told them during her initial assessment. Zuri has experienced physical trauma, yes, but also a profound betrayal of trust. The people who are supposed to protect her instead caused her harm. That violation can be more damaging than the physical wound. While Layla stayed at the hospital, protected by the undercover FBI agents that Director Hayden had arranged, Elijah divided his time between building his case and supporting his family. He had converted his motel room into an investigation headquarters, walls covered with photos, timelines, and connection maps that grew more complex by the day. His methodical compilation of evidence had already revealed a disturbing pattern of racial profiling and excessive force within the Mapleton Police Department. Records showed that black residents were 5 times more likely to have force used against them during encounters with police, and complaints filed by black citizens were dismissed at 3 times the rate of those filed by white residents. More disturbing was his discovery through careful records analysis of 5 previous cases involving excessive force against black citizens with disabilities. 2 years earlier, a 23-year-old black man with cerebral palsy had been pepper sprayed and beaten during a traffic stop when officers mistook his movement disorder for resistance. A year before that, a deaf black woman in her 30s had been tasered after failing to respond to verbal commands during a street stop. None of these cases had resulted in disciplinary action against the officers involved. Elijah was documenting these patterns when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Blue Heron Park, East Bench. 20 minutes. Come alone. Important information. The message carried the hallmarks of Officer Delaney's writing style from the text messages Sergeant Washington had provided. Elijah considered the possibility of a trap, but decided the potential intelligence was worth the risk. He arrived at the deserted park 19 minutes later, approaching the meeting point from an indirect route after confirming he wasn't being followed. Officer Michael Delaney sat alone on the bench out of uniform, his posture betraying his anxiety. He jumped when Elijah appeared beside him. "Jesus, don't do that," he gasped, hand instinctively moving toward a weapon that wasn't there. "I didn't hear you approach." "Neither did my daughter," Elijah replied coldly, "before you and Reed shot her." Delaney flinched as if struck. "That's why I'm here. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Reed lied about what happened, and Chief Garrison ordered us to stick to the story. They made me falsify my incident report. The admission was significant, potentially providing the basis for multiple federal charges." "Why come forward now?" Elijah pressed, needing to assess Delaney's credibility and motivation. The young officer stared at his hands. "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see your daughter's face when that bullet hit her. I joined the force to help people, not to shoot kids and cover it up." He looked up, his expression haunted. "Reed has been pulling this kind of stuff for years, but Garrison always protects him. When Reed threw your daughter to the ground, I should have stepped in, but I was too afraid of crossing him." "Tell me about the body cam footage," Elijah said, getting to the critical evidence. Delaney nodded. "It exists. Garrison ordered the IT department to corrupt the files in the official record, but he keeps secure copies of everything potentially damaging as insurance. The footage clearly shows Reed escalating the situation and shooting without justification. It also recorded him using racial slurs before and after the incident. This confirmed what Sergeant Washington had told him about the backups. Who else knows about these secure files? Delaney glanced nervously over his shoulder. Garrison, Captain Williams, maybe a couple others in the inner circle. They use the material to keep officers in line. If you step out of line, suddenly there's evidence of misconduct that can be used against you. The implications were staggering. A police chief maintaining a blackmail library to ensure loyalty and silence. "I need that footage," Elijah stated simply. Delaney shook his head. "I can't access it, but—" He hesitated, then continued. "I can tell you that Judge Hamilton signed off on the warrant to search your daughter's belongings after the shooting, even though there was zero probable cause. Hamilton and Garrison play poker together every Thursday night, along with the mayor and the district attorney. They call themselves the Round Table." This explained the announcement Elijah had seen on the evening news. The Mapleton District Attorney's Office had declared they would not be filing charges against officers Reed or Delaney, claiming their actions were justified under department policy. The corruption reached beyond the police department into the broader justice system of Mapleton. Before they parted, Delaney provided one more crucial piece of information. Reed and Beverly Williams are planning to file a new statement claiming they saw Zuri attempting to steal from Williams' shop before the confrontation. They're trying to establish a pattern of criminal behavior to justify the escalation. Elijah's expression remained neutral, but internally his rage intensified at this latest attempt to smear his daughter's character. The following morning brought news that the local prosecutor had officially declined to press charges against either officer involved in Zuri's shooting, citing insufficient evidence of criminal intent, despite dozens of witness statements and partial video evidence contradicting the official police narrative. The announcement sparked renewed protests across Mapleton, with Layla emerging as a powerful voice leading the community's demands for justice. Standing on the steps of City Hall, her voice amplified by both a megaphone and the moral authority of a mother whose child had been victimized. Layla addressed a crowd of hundreds. "My daughter cannot speak for herself today," she declared, her words carrying across the hushed gathering. "The same system that silenced her with a bullet now tries to silence all of us with lies and intimidation. But we will not be silent." The crowd erupted in supportive chants and raised fists. Elijah watched from the periphery, proud of his wife's strength, while remaining vigilant for potential threats. The protests had grown larger and more vocal as national media began picking up the story, putting pressure on local officials who had initially tried to downplay the incident. While Layla led the public fight, Elijah continued his shadow investigation. A deep background check on Chief Garrison revealed that, before coming to Mapleton, he had served as a police captain in Riverside County, where similar patterns of misconduct and cover-ups had occurred under his watch. More damning was the financial trail Elijah uncovered. Garrison and Judge Hamilton both held substantial investments in Southeastern Correctional Facilities, a private prison company that contracted with the county to house inmates. The more arrests and convictions Mapleton produced, particularly for non-violent offenses that disproportionately targeted black residents, the more profitable their investments became. The conflict of interest was glaring and potentially criminal. As pieces of the puzzle fell into place, investigative reporter Kendra Watson published a front-page expose in the Mapleton Chronicle, questioning the official narrative of Zuri's shooting. The article featured interviews with multiple witnesses whose accounts contradicted the police version of events, analysis from use-of-force experts calling the shooting grossly unjustified, and pointed questions about the convenient failure of both officers' body cameras. The story sent shockwaves through the community and prompted calls from state legislators for an independent investigation. Chief Garrison responded with a hastily arranged press conference, where he doubled down on supporting his officers and attacked the newspaper for irresponsible journalism that endangers the men and women in uniform. But the pressure was building, cracks appearing in the wall of silence that had protected corrupt officers for so long. That evening, as Elijah was reviewing evidence in his motel room, his secure line rang. Director Hayden's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Elijah, we've got a problem. Someone at Justice leaked that we're looking into the Mapleton situation. Your credentials have been temporarily suspended, pending an investigation into allegations of unauthorized use of FBI resources for personal matters." The development was a significant setback, but not entirely unexpected. "Garrison has friends in high places," Elijah noted grimly. "How much time do I have before this becomes official?" 48 hours at most," Hayden replied. "I'm fighting it, but the political pressure is intense. Whatever you're going to do, do it fast. Once the suspension is official, any evidence you gather becomes fruit of the poisoned tree." The legal reference was clear evidence obtained by an agent acting outside official capacity could be deemed inadmissible. Elijah's window of opportunity was closing rapidly. After ending the call, he stared at the wall of evidence he had accumulated, mentally calculating his next move. The corrupt system was moving to protect itself, attempting to neutralize him by attacking his professional standing. But they had made a critical miscalculation. A father fighting for justice for his child couldn't be stopped by bureaucratic maneuvers. "Let me ask you this. What lengths would you go to when the system designed to protect your family becomes the very thing threatening them? Would you follow the rules when those in power are breaking them with impunity?" Comment number 1. If you believe Elijah should go completely off the books to bring down Garrison and his corrupt officers. Comment number 2. If you think he should trust the system and let the official investigation run its course. Like and subscribe to see how far one father will go to bring justice for his daughter. Will Elijah's FBI career survive his quest for justice? Or will he sacrifice everything to make those responsible pay? The storm is about to break in our next chapter. The suspension of his FBI credentials struck Elijah like a physical blow, but it didn't deter him. If anything, it crystallized his resolve, transforming his investigation from an official inquiry into a personal crusade. No longer bound by bureau protocols or chain of command, he was free to pursue justice through channels that would have been professionally forbidden. In his motel room, he methodically removed his service weapon badge and credentials from the table where they had sat throughout the investigation. These symbols of his professional identity were set aside, replaced by the tools of a different kind of justice-seeker: burner phones, a digital camera with a telephoto lens, and a notebook filled with connections and evidence that now existed, Outside official channels. Zuri had been moved from the hospital to their home the previous day, the doctors determining that her physical recovery would progress better in familiar surroundings. The psychological wounds, however, remained raw and deep. Dr. Maya Chen, the trauma specialist for deaf children, visited daily, working patiently to rebuild Zuri's shattered sense of safety and trust. "She's experiencing a form of dissociative withdrawal, doctor," Chen explained to Elijah and Layla during a consultation in their living room, keeping her voice low, though Zuri couldn't hear them from her bedroom upstairs. "Her brain is protecting itself by disconnecting from communication, even sign language, which has been associated with the trauma." The specialist's compassionate eyes met theirs. "But there are positive signs. She's begun drawing, which is often the first step in trauma recovery for children. It gives them a way to express what they can't yet put into words or signs." She showed them Zuri's latest drawing, a crude but recognizable depiction of Officer Reed, standing over a small figure on the ground, his gun pointed downward. The image was heartbreaking in its simplicity and terrible accuracy. "Keep encouraging her artistic expression," Dr. Chen advised. "It's her way of processing what happened, of beginning to reclaim her narrative." While Layla coordinated Zuri's care and continued to serve as the public face of their fight for justice, appearing at rallies and giving interviews to keep the pressure on local authorities, Elijah worked in the shadows. His first act as a private citizen was to compile dossiers on 5 previous cases he had identified involving excessive force against Black disabled citizens by Mapleton police officers. Using public records, news accounts, and discreet interviews with the victims and their families, he documented a clear pattern of discrimination and abuse that had been systematically covered up by the department's leadership. One case particularly haunted him 2 years earlier. A 23-year-old Black man named Jamal Winters, who had cerebral palsy, had been pepper sprayed and beaten during a traffic stop when officers mistook his involuntary movements for resistance. Winters had filed a complaint that was summarily dismissed by Internal Affairs, with Captain James Williams, Beverly Williams' brother, concluding that the officers had followed appropriate protocols given the circumstances. Elijah tracked down Winters, now working at a community center for disabled youth, and recorded his testimony about the incident and its aftermath. "After they dismissed my complaint, strange things started happening." Winters explained his speech, affected by his condition, but his memory crystal clear. "My car got pulled over 3 times in 1 week. Officers would park outside my apartment building just watching. The message was clear: drop it or the harassment continues." Other victims shared similar experiences of intimidation after attempting to seek accountability. The pattern was undeniable and deeply disturbing. While building these historical cases, Elijah received an unexpected text from Officer Delaney. "Need to meet. New information. Same place, midnight." The clandestine meeting in Blue Heron Park revealed Delaney's growing crisis of conscience. "Reed and Chief Garrison are pressuring me to change my statement again," he confessed, pacing nervously in the darkness. "They want me to say I clearly saw Zuri reaching for something in her pocket that I believed was a weapon. But that's not what happened. She was just trying to get her ID card out." Elijah studied the young officer closely. "Why are you really helping me, Delaney? Self-preservation, guilty conscience, or something else?" Delaney stopped pacing and met Elijah's gaze directly for the first time. "My sister has a daughter with Down syndrome. When I saw Reed throw Zuri to the ground, all I could think was that could be my niece someday, terrified and hurt because someone with a badge didn't have the patience or humanity to recognize her disability." His voice cracked slightly. "I became a cop because I thought I could be one of the good ones, make a difference from the inside. But the system doesn't want good cops. It wants obedient ones." The confession rang true, and Elijah decided to take a calculated risk. "I need the body cam footage, Delaney. Not just for Zuri, but for all the other victims who never got justice." Delaney shook his head. "I told you I can't access it, but—" He hesitated, then continued. "I overheard Garrison telling Captain Williams that Judge Hamilton ordered them to preserve all evidence related to the shooting, including the original body cam files. There's a federal judicial order they can't ignore without committing a federal crime themselves." This was the break Elijah had been waiting for. With a judicial preservation order in place, destroying the evidence would elevate the conspiracy to obstruct justice to the federal level, potentially triggering mandatory intervention from the Justice Department. The next day, Elijah arranged a discreet meeting with federal judge Sandra Torres, who had issued the preservation order. In her chambers away from the corrupt local justice system, he presented the evidence he had gathered as a private citizen concerned about civil rights violations in his community. "This pattern of behavior extends beyond my daughter's case," he explained, laying out the dossiers he had compiled. "There's systemic discrimination against both racial minorities and disabled citizens in Mapleton, enabled and covered up by the highest levels of local law enforcement and judiciary." Judge Torres reviewed the materials with growing concern. "This is extremely troubling, Mr. Brooks, particularly the financial connections between Chief Garrison Judge Hamilton and the private prison industry." She looked up from the documents. "I understand your FBI credentials have been suspended." Elijah nodded grimly. "Political interference. But that doesn't change the facts of what's happening in Mapleton." Judge Torres tapped her fingers thoughtfully on her desk. "As a private citizen, your ability to gather evidence is limited. But as a federal judge, I have certain powers." She made a decision. "I'll issue warrants for the original body cam footage and departmental records based on the evidence you've provided to be executed by federal marshals rather than local law enforcement." She held up a cautioning hand. "This must be by the book, Mr. Brooks. I understand your personal stake in this, but if we're going to expose this corruption, it must withstand the highest legal scrutiny." Elijah agreed, grateful for the judge's integrity and willingness to act. Meanwhile, the pressure on the Mapleton power structure continued to build from multiple directions. Layla's activism had drawn national civil rights organizations to the city, with prominent leaders holding press conferences demanding federal intervention. Kendra Watson's investigative reporting had expanded beyond Zuri's case to expose the financial conflicts of interest among city leadership, resulting in a state ethics investigation. And in a surprising development, Sergeant Alicia Washington had filed a formal whistleblower complaint with the State Attorney General's office detailing years of discriminatory practices and cover-ups she had witnessed within the Worfing Department. The corrupt system that had operated with impunity for so long was beginning to fracture under the combined weight of public scrutiny, media exposure, and legal challenges. But the most dangerous animals are those that are wounded and cornered, and the Mapleton power structure wasn't going down without a fight. Officer Reed and Beverly Williams executed their plan to further smear Zuri's character, filing supplemental statements, claiming they had witnessed her attempting to steal merchandise before the confrontation. The false allegations were quickly picked up by certain media outlets friendly to the police department, running headlines questioning Zuri's innocence and character, despite her being an 8-year-old child with no prior behavioral issues. The smear campaign backfired spectacularly when the owner of a neighboring shop came forward with security camera footage showing Beverly Williams entering her store shortly before the incident, with no sign of Zuri anywhere near the placed premises. The blatant fabrication of evidence further eroded public trust in the official narrative and strengthened support for the Brooks family. As the pressure mounted, Chief Garrison grew increasingly desperate. Elijah's surveillance revealed late-night meetings between Garrison Judge Hamilton and Mayor Richardson at a hunting cabin outside city limits, presumably to coordinate their response to the growing crisis. The next morning, Elijah received an urgent call from Director Hayden. "We've got movement at Justice," Hayden reported, keeping his voice low, as if concerned about being overheard. "The Civil Rights Division has taken notice of the case, particularly after Judge Torres issued those federal warrants. They're considering opening an official investigation." It was the breakthrough they had been working toward, but Hayden's tone remained cautious. "There's still resistance from above. Garrison has political connections reaching into Washington. But if we can secure that body cam footage before it mysteriously disappears, even his friends in high places won't be able to protect him." The critical moment came unexpectedly that evening, when Elijah received a text from Sergeant Washington. "It's happening now. Garrison and Williams are in the evidence room with the IT director. They're trying to wipe the servers before the federal warrants are executed tomorrow." Elijah immediately contacted Judge Torres, who authorized emergency execution of the warrants she had prepared. Within 45 minutes, federal marshals descended on the Mapleton Police Department headquarters, securing the evidence room and IT servers before the deletion could be completed. Chief Garrison and Captain Williams were caught literally red-handed, attempting to erase the digital evidence that had been legally ordered preserved. The bodycam footage was secured intact, along with years of departmental records documenting the systematic civil rights violations that had flourished under Garrison's leadership. The footage from both officers' cameras told the unambiguous truth. Zuri had made no threatening movements, had attempted to communicate her disability through sign language, and by reaching for her identification card, and had been thrown to the ground and shot without justification by Officer Reed, who could be clearly heard using racial slurs before and after the shooting. The visual evidence was damning beyond dispute, revealing not just excessive force, but clear racial animus that elevated the incident to a hate crime. Back at home, as the legal machinery began grinding toward justice, Elijah sat beside Zuri's bed watching her sleep. For the first time since the shooting, her expression was peaceful, her dreams apparently free from the terrors that had haunted her recovery. On her bedside table lay her latest drawing, a crude but recognizable depiction of her father standing tall, protecting a small figure that was clearly meant to be her. The simple image conveyed what she still couldn't express in signs, that despite everything, she still believed in her father's ability to protect her and make things right. Elijah gently touched the drawing, a renewed sense of purpose flowing through him. The system had failed his daughter, but he had not. Through methodical investigation, strategic alliances, and unflinching determination, he had forced the corrupt power structure of Mapleton into the light where it could not survive scrutiny. Justice was coming not just for Zuri, but for all the victims who had suffered in silence before her. As he watched his daughter sleep, Elijah made a silent vow this wouldn't end with prosecutions and reforms in one small city. What had happened to Zuri would become a catalyst for broader change, a case study in the intersection of racial injustice and discrimination against disabled citizens that would drive national reform. The breaking point had been reached not just for the corrupt system in Mapleton, but for Elijah's tolerance of injustice anywhere. From this moment forward, his professional mission and personal crusade would be one and the same, ensuring that no child, regardless of race or disability, would ever again face the brutality and injustice that had been inflicted on his daughter. Dawn broke over Mapleton as a convoy of unmarked federal vehicles rolled into the city, their arrival as methodical and inevitable as justice itself. Special Agent Vanessa Rodriguez, a 38-year-old veteran of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, led the team of 12 agents assigned to execute the federal warrants and secure evidence. Elijah, his credentials, provisionally reinstated after the discovery of political interference in his suspension, stood beside her as they approached the police headquarters, his face set in grim determination. "We do this by the book," Rodriguez reminded him quietly. "I know your daughter was the victim, but today you're an FBI agent first. We need this case to be bulletproof." Elijah nodded, understanding the delicate balance required. His personal crusade for justice had laid the groundwork, but now the full weight of federal law enforcement would transform individual accountability into systemic change. The raid was executed with precision that gave the corrupt officers no time to destroy additional evidence. Teams of agents simultaneously descended on the police headquarters, the homes of Chief Garrison and Officer Reed, and the offices of Judge Hamilton and Mayor Richardson. The element of surprise was total, catching the architects of Mapleton's corrupt system completely unprepared. At the police station, Chief Garrison was discovered in his office frantically deleting files from his computer when agents burst through the door. His face drained of color as he recognized Elijah among the federal agents, the realization dawning that the father he had underestimated had brought the full force of federal law enforcement down upon him. "Robert Garrison, you're under arrest for civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy against rights," Rodriguez announced, reciting the federal charges as another agent secured the police chief's hands behind his pardon, back with handcuffs. "Your computer and files are being seized as evidence." Across town, Officer Thomas Reed had apparently received warning of the raids and attempted to flee. His packed suitcase and passport suggested plans for a more permanent escape, but roadblocks established at the county line intercepted him before he could get far. As agents placed him under arrest, Reed's arrogance finally cracked. "You don't understand," he pleaded, his previous swagger replaced by desperation. "Garrison told me we were protected, that the system would back us up no matter what." The inadvertent confession simply added to the mounting evidence of conspiracy. Meanwhile, Beverly Williams broke down almost immediately under FBI questioning, admitting that she had never seen Zuri attempting to steal from her shop. "Chief Garrison asked me to say those things," she confessed tearfully. "He said it was to protect the department's reputation, that it was for the greater good. James is my brother. I was just trying to help family." Her recorded statement corroborated the pattern of fabricated evidence and coordinated cover-up that Elijah had painstakingly documented. The most damning evidence came from the secured body cam footage, which clearly showed Reed escalating the situation and shooting without justification, contradicting every element of the official report. More disturbing were Reed's comments immediately after the shooting, captured clearly on audio. "These people need to learn respect for authority. One less future troublemaker to worry about." The racial animus behind his actions could not have been more explicit. As the day progressed, the full scope of corruption within Mapleton's power structure was exposed for public view. Federal agents discovered a hidden safe in Judge Hamilton's chambers, containing records of payoffs from the private prison company to both Hamilton and Garrison based on arrest and conviction quotas. The financial incentives explained the department's aggressive policing in minority neighborhoods and the judicial rubber stamping of questionable arrests and searches. Sergeant Alicia Washington emerged as a key witness, providing years of documentation she had secretly maintained about departmental misconduct. "I started keeping records after the first time I reported excessive force, and watched the complaint disappear," she explained during her formal statement. "Nobody would listen to me within the department, so I built my own case, waiting for someone who would take it seriously." Her meticulous records corroborated Elijah's findings and added crucial insider testimony about the systematic nature of the abuse. Officer Michael Delaney, facing the reality of his participation in the cover-up, accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony against Reed and Garrison. Reed had been pulling this kind of stuff for years, he testified. Targeting minorities, escalating routine encounters using excessive force, and Garrison always protected him, buried the complaints, intimidated witnesses. It was like an unwritten policy that certain neighborhoods and certain people were fair game. The evidence of a years-long pattern of civil rights violations targeting black residents was overwhelming. Internal communications revealed explicit directives to focus enforcement actions on the predominantly black east side of Mapleton, with arrest quotas tied to officer evaluations and promotions. Records showed that complaints filed by black citizens were routinely classified as unfounded without investigation, while similar complaints from white residents received thorough follow-up. The most disturbing discovery was a text message exchange between Garrison and Judge Hamilton, discussing how to handle Zuri's case. "Need this one to go away," Clean Garrison had written. "Kid's father is FBI, but doesn't know we know. Can you make sure any lawsuit gets assigned to your court?" Hamilton's response had been chillingly casual. "Already on it. No jury in this town will rule against our boys in blue. We'll bury it like all the others." The systematic corruption had finally been exposed to the disinfecting light of public scrutiny. But for Elijah, the most personal moment of the day came when he personally placed Chief Garrison in a federal transport vehicle. As he secured the former police chief's seatbelt, Elijah leaned in close. "My daughter couldn't hear your officer's commands because she's deaf," he said quietly, his voice controlled despite the emotion behind it. "What's your excuse for not hearing the cries for justice from all the victims you've silenced over the years?" Garrison had no response, his arrogance finally shattered by the reality of his situation. That evening, as national news broadcasts led with the story of federal raids in Mapleton and the arrest of multiple city officials, Elijah returned home to find a miracle waiting. Zuri, who had not used sign language since the shooting, was sitting with Dr. Chen in the living room, her small hands hesitantly forming basic signs. The trauma specialist's eyes shone with professional satisfaction as she explained, "She saw you on television today making the arrests. I think seeing you take action, seeing that you really could protect her and bring those who hurt her to justice, created a breakthrough." When Zuri saw her father, her hands formed their special sign combining love and strength, the gesture they had created years ago. Elijah knelt before her, returning the sign with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. The long road to healing had begun in earnest for both Zuri and the community she represented. In the days that followed, the Department of Justice announced a complete overhaul of the Mapleton Police Department, placing it under federal consent decree with mandatory reforms to training use of force policies and accountability mechanisms. Sergeant Alicia Washington, whose integrity had never wavered despite years of institutional pressure, was appointed as interim chief, with a mandate to rebuild community trust and implement the required changes. The case quickly became a national rallying point for discussions about the intersection of racial justice and disability rights, with advocates pointing to Zuri's experience as evidence of the compound discrimination faced by minorities with disabilities. Elijah, still processing his own trauma and supporting his daughter's recovery, found himself increasingly called upon to speak about these issues, to share their story as a catalyst for broader systemic change. 2 weeks after the arrests, Zuri took a step that left her parents and therapist in awe of her courage. She agreed to testify before the grand jury considering federal civil rights charges against Reed and Garrison. With a sign language interpreter beside her, the 8-year-old recounted her experience in simple but powerful terms, her small hands flying as she described her fear and confusion when the officers confronted her, the pain of being thrown to the ground and the burning agony of the bullet tearing through her shoulder. There wasn't a dry eye in the jury room as she signed about waking up in the hospital afraid to communicate because, in her young mind, her attempts to use sign language had somehow caused the violence against her. The grand jury returned indictments on all counts, ensuring that the case would proceed to trial with the full weight of federal civil rights law behind it. As Elijah guided his daughter from the courthouse after her testimony, surrounded by security to shield her from the media gathered outside, he felt a complex mixture of emotions, pride in Zuri's courage, rage at the system that had forced an 8-year-old to endure such trauma, and grim satisfaction that accountability was finally coming. The reckoning had begun not just for the individuals who had harmed his daughter, but for the corrupt system that had enabled and protected them for far too long. As they drove home, Zuri's small hand found his forming the sign for justice before returning to their special symbol of love and strength. In that simple gesture, Elijah found renewed purpose. This fight wasn't over with arrests and indictments. It had only just begun. Number, Part 10. Silent no more. 6 months after the federal raids that had exposed the deep-rooted corruption in Mapleton, Elijah Brooks stood in the doorway of the police chief's office watching as Chief Garrison cleared out his personal belongings under the supervision of federal agents. The once powerful man who had ruled the department like a personal fiefdom now moved with the defeated posture of someone facing years in federal prison. When Garrison finally noticed Elijah's presence, he straightened slightly, a flash of his old arrogance returning. "Come to gloat, Brooks?" he asked, his voice hoarse from hours of testimony before a federal grand jury. Elijah stepped fully into the office, deliberately closing the door behind him. With calm precision, he placed his FBI badge on the desk between them and removed his service weapon, setting it beside the badge. The symbolic gesture was clear. This conversation would happen between men, not between a federal agent and a suspect. "I'm not here to gloat," Elijah replied, his voice steady, despite the emotion churning beneath the surface. "I'm here to make sure you understand exactly what you're paying for." He removed a photograph from his jacket pocket. Zuri in her hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her small body to machines, her eyes vacant with trauma. "This is what your system did to my 8-year-old daughter. This is the price of your corruption." Garrison's eyes flickered to the photo and away, unable to hold the gaze of either Elijah or the visual evidence of his department's actions. "It was never supposed to go that far," he muttered, a weak attempt at self-justification. "Reed was out of control." "But the system! Don't you dare blame the system," Elijah interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "You were the system. You built it, maintained it, protected it. Every complaint you buried, every officer like Reed you promoted, every witness you intimidated, those were your choices." He leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. "My daughter couldn't use sign language for weeks after the shooting. Did you know that? She thought communicating with her hands was what got her shot. An 8-year-old child was silenced by your department's actions." Garrison shifted uncomfortably, his bravado crumbling. "I have powerful friends," he attempted one last desperate grasp at his former influence. "This isn't over. There will be appeals, political pressure." Elijah cut him off by placing a thick file folder on the desk. "This is the complete case file against you, Garrison. Not just Zuri's shooting, but 15 years of civil rights violations, financial corruption, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. I've documented 57 separate cases where your officers used excessive force against minority citizens. 17 of those victims had disabilities." He tapped the folder. "Your powerful friends are running for cover. Nobody wants to be associated with what you've done, especially now that the national media has hold of the story." As if on cue, through the office window, they could see news vans from national networks setting up for live broadcasts outside the police headquarters. The Mapleton case had become a symbol of the intersection between racial injustice and discrimination against disabled citizens, drawing attention from civil rights organizations, disability advocates, and federal lawmakers, calling for National reforms. Garrison's face sagged as the reality of his situation fully registered. His empire hadn't just been damaged, it had been completely dismantled, exposed to public scrutiny that it could not withstand. Everything he had built over decades of careful corruption and intimidation had crumbled in a matter of months, brought down by the determination of one father fighting for justice for his child. Outside the office, the department buzzed with activity as federal agents continued gathering evidence and interviewing officers. The Mapleton Police Department was now under a consent decree, its operations supervised by the Department of Justice, while a complete overhaul of policies, training, and personnel took place. Through the glass walls, Elijah could see Sergeant Alicia Washington, now Interim Chief Washington, directing the transition process with quiet authority. Her integrity during years of institutional corruption had made her the natural choice to lead the department's reformation. The climactic moment of Garrison's downfall came as federal agents led him, along with Officer Reed and 3 other indicted officers, through the main lobby of the police headquarters. News cameras captured the image that would lead broadcasts across the country, the corrupt leadership of the Mapleton Police Department in handcuffs being escorted to federal vehicles as a diverse crowd of community members watched. Solemn validation of their long-ignored complaints. Among the observers was Pastor James Wilson, who had supported the Brooks family from the beginning. "This is just the first step," he told reporters, his voice carrying the weight of decades fighting for civil rights. "True justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about creating systems that prevent it from happening again." The pastor's words echoed Elijah's own evolving understanding of justice. As the investigation had progressed, his focus had expanded from seeking accountability for Zuri's shooting to addressing the broader patterns of discrimination that had enabled it. This wider perspective led to a significant announcement from the Department of Justice the following week: the establishment of a specialized task force to investigate civil rights violations, specifically involving disabled citizens from minority communities. Elijah Brooks was named to lead this initiative, bringing his unique perspective as both an FBI agent and the father of a child who had experienced the intersection of racial and disability discrimination. The press conference announcing the task force drew national media attention. Standing at the podium with Layla and Zuri beside him, Elijah addressed the assembled reporters and community members. "What happened to my daughter was not an isolated incident," he stated, his voice steady with purpose. "It was the product of systemic failures that have gone unaddressed for too long. This task force represents a commitment to ensuring that all citizens, regardless of race, disability status, or any other characteristic, receive equal protection under the law." What the cameras couldn't capture was the private journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 weeks earlier, Dr. Maya Chen had facilitated a breakthrough session with Zuri, using art therapy to help her process her trauma. The drawing Zuri produced showed Officer Reed pointing his gun at her, but now she had added something new herself, standing tall and unafraid, her hands forming signs that radiated outward like beams of light. "She's reclaiming her voice," Dr. Chen had explained. "The signs aren't what caused her pain. They're her power, her way of fighting back." The therapeutic progress continued when Zuri agreed to join a children's support group for trauma survivors. Initially reluctant to participate, she gradually began to engage with the other children, her natural empathy overcoming her fear. By the 3rd session, she was helping a younger child learn basic signs, her hands moving with growing confidence as she shared her language. Most remarkable was Zuri's idea to start an ASL program to teach police officers how to communicate with deaf citizens, with support from Interim Chief Washington and Dr. Chen. The program began as a small pilot with volunteer officers who wanted to be part of the department's transformation. The image of Zuri standing before a group of uniformed officers patiently teaching them signs for help, understand, and safe became a powerful symbol of healing and reform that extended beyond Mapleton. The national attention brought opportunities for broader impact. Layla, who had emerged as a compelling advocate during the protests following Zuri's shooting, was invited to join a presidential commission on police reform, where she spoke powerfully about the need for improved training on engaging with disabled citizens, especially those from minority communities. "My daughter was doubly vulnerable," she testified before Congress. "She was targeted because of her race and then brutalized because of her disability. We need systems that protect our most vulnerable citizens, not ones that view their differences as threats to be neutralized." 6 months to the day after Zuri's shooting, the Brooks family participated in a community healing ceremony in the same park where the Spring Festival had been held. Hundreds of Mapleton residents gathered to acknowledge the harm that had been done and commit to building a more just community. The event featured speakers from civil rights organizations, disability advocacy groups, and reformed law enforcement, all united in their determination to create meaningful change. The most powerful moment came when Zuri approached the microphone, her interpreter beside her. For a breathless moment, she looked out at the gathered crowd, her young face solemn with the weight of her experience. Then her hands began to move, forming signs that the interpreter voiced for those who couldn't understand them. "I was scared to use my hands after I was hurt," the interpreter translated as Zuri signed. "I thought my signs made the police angry. But now I know my hands are my voice, and no one can take my voice away again." Her small fingers moved with growing confidence as she continued. "When people don't understand each other, bad things happen. I want to help people understand. I want to make sure no other kid feels scared like I was." There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering, as Zuri concluded with a message of hope that belied her young age. "We can learn to talk to each other in lots of different ways. We can learn to listen with more than our ears. We can be better if we try." As she finished, the crowd erupted in the visual applause of the deaf community, hands raised and shaking in the air, a silent ovation that honored her preferred mode of communication. The image of hundreds of raised, shaking hands became another powerful symbol of the community's commitment to change. In the months that followed, the reforms in Mapleton began to show measurable results. Complaints of excessive force decreased by 70% under Interim Chief Washington's leadership. The department implemented mandatory training on engaging with disabled citizens, with Zuri's ASL program expanded and made a permanent part of officer preparation. Body cameras were now required to be activated during all citizen encounters, with strict penalties for non-compliance. And perhaps most significantly, a civilian oversight board with real disciplinary authority was established, ensuring that future complaints would receive fair and transparent consideration. For the Brooks family, healing remained an ongoing process. Zuri still experienced nightmares and anxiety in certain situations, particularly around uniformed officers she didn't know. But her resilience continued to amaze her parents and therapist. She had returned to school where her experience had prompted administrators to implement disability awareness programs and improve support services for deaf students. The legal proceedings against the officers and officials involved in Zuri's case, and the subsequent cover-up, continued to work through the federal court system. Officer Reed and Chief Garrison faced multiple federal civil rights charges that carried potential sentences of 20 years or more. Judge Hamilton and several other officials had accepted plea deals in exchange for testimony, their careers and reputations destroyed by the exposure of their corruption. Elijah's new role leading the specialized FBI task force kept him traveling frequently, investigating similar cases across the country, and developing best practices for law enforcement engagement with disabled citizens. The work was challenging, but deeply fulfilling, transforming his family's trauma into a force for positive change that would protect countless other vulnerable citizens. 1 year after the shooting, Elijah stood in the doorway of Zuri's bedroom, watching as she practiced a presentation she would be giving the next day at a national conference on policing and disability rights. At 9 years old, she had become an unlikely but powerful advocate, her personal experience giving weight to her message about the importance of communication and understanding across differences. Her hands moved confidently through the signs she had created with Dr. Chen's help, telling her story not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. The physical scar on her shoulder would always remain a permanent reminder of the day when systemic injustice had literally pierced her small body. But the psychological wounds were healing, transformed by her own courage and the support of a community that had finally confronted its deepest failures. As Zuri noticed him watching and smiled, forming their special sign for love and strength, Elijah reflected on the journey they had traveled. What had begun as a father's desperate fight for justice for his child had evolved into something larger, a movement for reform that would protect countless other vulnerable citizens. Zuri had been silenced temporarily by trauma, but she had found her voice again, a voice that now reached far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Through the darkness of their experience, they had emerged not just as survivors, but as architects of change, transforming a system that had failed them into one that might finally deliver on its promise of equal justice for all. In that moment, watching his daughter's hands shape a future, neither of them could have envisioned a year earlier. Elijah understood the true meaning of justice, not merely punishment for wrongdoing, but the creation of a world where such wrongs became increasingly difficult to commit and impossible to ignore. Has this story of injustice and a father's fight for his daughter moved you? Do you believe more needs to be done to protect vulnerable citizens from those who abuse their power? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can create better systems that protect everyone equally. If you found Zuri's journey powerful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that shine a light on important social issues. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of resilience and transformation. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey from trauma to triumph, from silence to speaking truth to power. Remember, in the words of young Zuri, we can learn to listen with more than our ears. We can be better if we try. This powerful story reminds us that justice often requires extraordinary courage from ordinary people. When systems fail to protect the vulnerable, especially at the intersection of race and disability, change demands both personal resilience and systemic reform. Elijah's journey shows that justice isn't just about punishment, but about transforming broken institutions into ones that serve all citizens equally. His methodical approach, gathering evidence, building alliances, and exposing corruption, demonstrates how careful strategy can dismantle seemingly impenetrable power structures. Zuri's experience highlights the unique vulnerability of disabled minorities who face compound discrimination. Her journey from trauma to advocacy illustrates how personal pain can become a catalyst for broader social change. The story also reveals how corruption flourishes in silence and darkness, but withers under scrutiny and accountability. Perhaps most importantly, this narrative shows that true healing requires more than legal victories. It demands institutional transformation, community reconciliation, and personal recovery. Zuri, reclaiming her voice both literally through sign language and figuratively through advocacy, represents the ultimate triumph over those who would silence marginalized communities. The story teaches us that no system is too entrenched to change when faced with determined opposition, and that a single case, when properly leveraged, can spark reforms that protect countless others from similar injustice. Has Zuri's story touched your heart and opened your eyes to the challenges faced by those who experience discrimination at the intersection of race and disability? We want to hear your thoughts. Have you witnessed or experienced similar injustices in your community? How do you think we can better protect vulnerable citizens from abuse of power? Comment below with your perspective or personal experiences. If you believe these important stories need to be told, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that shine a light on social justice issues too often left in shadows. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these crucial stories. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the real impact of systemic discrimination, or anyone who might be inspired by Zuri's incredible resilience and her father's unwavering determination. Together we can amplify voices that have been silenced for too long. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey from trauma to triumph. Remember Zuri's powerful message: we can learn to listen with more than our ears, and we can always be better if we try.